Now we want to move on to the second topic, which is related to the factor that's shifting the IS curve. So similar to the full employment line, we say that for the IS curve, it is a curve that plotting on a diagram with the vertical axis R and the horizontal axis is Y. And because the IS curve is representing the relationship between R and Y when the goods market is in equilibrium. So now we want to move on to talk about the IS curve. So for the IS curve, it is about the goods market equilibrium. And similar to our discussion related to the full employment line, the IS curve also is drawing a curve that with the vertical axis is R and the horizontal axis is Y. And every point on top of the IS curve represents a goods market equilibrium. Therefore, when we are talking about the factor shifting the IS curve, then we want to see how does the real interest rate got changed when there is some shock happen to the economy. Given that the real interest rate is also the price of the goods market, so we know that when we want to identify how does each factor affecting the IS curve, we are given a fixed level of the Y, and then we want to see how does the shock affects the equilibrium real interest rate, and then we will be able to identify to what direction the IS curve shifts. So then here we say when we want to explore how the IS curve shifts, we're focusing on how real interest rate change given the same level of the output. So now what I want to do next is that again I want to illustrate the concept we discussed in here in graphs. So to begin with, we say for an IS curve, it is a line that trying to capture the goods market equilibrium in a diagram that the vertical axis is R and the horizontal axis is Y. And then we say that when there is shock happen to the goods market equilibrium, it will causes the saving and investment to change. Because the saving or investment got changed, so then the equilibrium price of the goods market, which is the R, got changed as well. So then every time when we want to see when there is something happen to the economy, we want to see how does it shift the IS curve, we look at how does the event causes the changes in the goods market equilibrium. Therefore, we want to use the saving and investment diagram to help us identify when the shock happened, what happened to the real interest rate, holding all the other things being equal. So to begin with, we want to look at the factors that affecting the savings, and thus it will be the factor affecting the goods market equilibrium and shifts the IS curve. So to begin with, we want to look at when there is an increase in the current income, what happened to the goods market equilibrium. It turned out that when the current income is higher, the saving is higher because people have a tendency of consumption smoothing. So then if the current income is higher, people prefer to save more for tomorrow use. Because of that, in the diagram of the saving and investment, we see that the increase in the current income will cause the right shifts of the saving curve. Because of that, we are going to have the relationship that when the income is higher, it causes the saving to increase, and then it causes the real interest rate to fall. Therefore, we can establish the relationship between the changes in the Y versus the changes in the R. And then that is how we derive the IS curve. We say that the IS curve is trying to capture the relationship between real interest rate R and the output Y when the goods market is in equilibrium. Given that the R is the equilibrium price of the goods market, therefore when we changes the income, it will changes the saving decision, and then it will affect the R, and the relationship between the R and Y will then be derived. Therefore, we say that when there is a fall in Y, then it will causes an increase in the R because saving should fall. Then because of that, when the Y changes, it will move along this IS curve. Therefore, we say for the first scenario, when the current income increases, even though it changes the goods market equilibrium, the IS curve doesn't shift at all because that is how we derive the IS curve. So now we want to look at the second scenario that is associated with an increase in the future income. When the future income increases, it will cause a fall in the savings. That is because holding all the other things being equal, when we know that we are going to have more income in the future, then we know we will prefer to smooth our consumption, so we are going to save less today, and then we will be able to have more likely equal consumption across time. Therefore, based on this case, we know that when the future income increases, it causes the saving to fall. Then in the saving and investment diagram, the saving curve shifts to the left. Because of that, in equilibrium, the real interest rate rises. So then we know, holding all the other things being equal, which means that we are given the same y, we are going to have a higher r. Then it is associated with right shift of the IS curve, because we know the IS curve is capturing the relationship between r and y. When the y is the same, but then the r increases, then it means that the IS curve needs to shift up to the right, and then it will then result in a higher r. So then how about when there is an increase in wealth, what happened to the IS curve? When the wealth increase, then it causes the fall in savings. That is because the wealth increase doesn't affect the income, but it affects the consumption decisions. Therefore, when the wealth increase, the saving falls. When the saving falls in the saving and investment diagram, we know that the saving curve needs to shift to the left. Then because of that, the equilibrium price of the goods market now raises. Therefore, we know when the wealth increase, the R increases, holding the same income. Therefore, because we are holding the same level of the income, but the real interest rate now got higher, so we know the IS curve needs to shift to the right. So now we want to move on the next case, which is talking about when there is an increase in income tax, how will that affect the goods market equilibrium? It turned out that the answer is depends. That is because it depends on whether or not the Ricardian equivalence hold. If the Ricardian equivalence hold when the income tax increases, the saving of a nation will remain the same. That is because the government saving will increase due to the income tax increase, but the household saving need to fall. And then the two forces cancel out, so then the national saving remain the same. However, if the Ricardian equivalence doesn't hold, then it will cause the saving increases. Therefore, we know that in the saving and investment diagram, if there is an increase in the income taxes, when the Ricardian equivalence doesn't hold, then it will cause an increase in saving, which will cause the right shift of the saving curve. Because of that, the equilibrium real interest rate falls. Then we know that given any level of the output, the real interest rate should fall. Therefore, for IS curve, it will associate with left shift of the IS curve, because we know given the same level of the y, the r should fall, so then it implies that the IS curve needs to shift to the left. So these are the discussion related to the factor affecting the savings and how does it affect the goods market equilibrium, and then how does it affect the shifting of the IS curve. Now we want to look at investments perspective. So then when the future marginal product of capital becomes higher due to an increase in the productivity or labor input, then we know in the diagram that determines the optimal level of the K, we know that when the marginal product of the capital is higher, then we are going to have a higher optimal level of the K given the same real interest rate. Because of that, we are going to need to have more investment, then we will be able to have more capital stock. So then, under the saving and investment diagram, we know under this case, the investment curve needs to shift to the right. Then because of that, we are going to have a higher R in equilibrium. Then, given the same level of the y, we know that under the IS curve, when our y is the same but the r is higher, it implies that the IS curve need to shift to the right. Now let's take a look at another factor that will cause the changes in the investment, which is about tax on capital. When there is more tax imposed on capital, then it implies that the user cost of capital got increased. Then because of that, when we want to determine the optimal level of the K using this diagram, we know that the user cost now becomes higher, therefore the optimal level of the K now becomes less. Because of that, it implies that we need to invest less now so that we are going to be able to have less capital stock in the future. Then from the saving and investment diagram, we know that when the investment should fall, it associates with left shift of the investment curve. Because of that, it is associated with a lower R. Given that in here, again, we are given any level of the y, we are going to have a lower R. So then we know for the IS curve, it needs to shift to the left because the R now falls. So then in summary, we know that in general, when the saving increase or when the investment falls, then it will result in a lower R in the goods market equilibrium. Because of that, given the same level of the y, then it will associate with the left shift of the IS curve. However, there is an exception. The exception is that when the current income increases, it causes the saving to increase, and then it causes the R to fall. For this special case, we know that this is the way we use to establish the relationship between y and r for deriving the IS curve. Therefore, when the y changes, it will not shift the IS curve, that is, the IS curve stays. Now to end the discussion in this part, we want to look at a case, that is when the government expenditure got increases, then what happened to the shifting of the IS curve? It turned out that when the government expenditure increases, it causes the national saving to fall. When the national saving to fall in the saving and investment diagram, it causes a left shift of the saving curve. Therefore, at the end, we are going to have an equilibrium price of the goods market, that is the R, that turned out to be higher. So then for any given level of the Y, we know that when the R increases, it will cause the right shift of the IS curve. So then in here we complete the discussion related to the factor shifting the IS curve.